Chevrolet just built the first turbocharged Corvette in history, and they didn't do it quietly. Somewhere in a Kentucky test cell, an engine born from Le Mans racing is spinning past 9,000 RPM behind a mid-engine chassis that costs less than half of what its European rivals ask for the same numbers. Here at Premium Automotive Reviews, we've spent our careers chasing cars that redefine what an entire segment believes is possible, and the ZR1 forces a very uncomfortable question onto every supercar boardroom from Stuttgart to Maranello. What happens when America stops asking for permission? For 7 decades, the Corvette carried a reputation problem it never quite deserved. Brilliant chassis, honest pricing, held back by an image that lagged a generation behind its engineering. The C8 changed the architecture. The ZR1 changes the conversation entirely. This is the nameplate Chevrolet reserves for the moment they decide to stop competing on value and start competing on outright capability, and every generation that has worn the ZR1 badge has arrived as a shockwave rather than an update. The C4 ZR1 humbled Ferrari owners in the early 90s with a Lotus-developed heart nobody expected from a Chevrolet. The C7 ZR1 answered a decade later with a supercharged monster that could embarrass cars costing 4 times as much. Now the badge returns on the mid-engine platform, and for the first time in the car's history, it does so without a supercharger at all. Walk up to it, and the proportions tell you everything changed the moment the engine moved behind the driver. The nose sits low, tight, and purposeful, with almost no surface wasted on decoration. There's no traditional grille opening dominating the face. Instead, the front end reads as a network of intakes, each one earning its place by feeding either the radiators, the front brakes, or the underbody airflow that keeps this car planted at speeds most road cars never approach. The headlight signature is a narrow, blade-like sweep that tucks into the fender line rather than sitting on top of it, giving the front clip a hooded, predatory stance rather than a friendly one. Look closely at the hood and you'll notice it isn't flat. A shallow power crease runs down its center, flanked by vents that pull hot air away from the front-mounted cooling package. Because at this performance level, thermal management stops being a footnote and becomes a design language of its own. The front splitter extends aggressively beneath the bumper, finished in exposed carbon fiber, and it isn't there for aesthetics. It's a working aerodynamic surface, generating meaningful downforce the moment the car crosses highway speed. Beneath it, canards and dive planes cut into the lower fascia, small in size, but disproportionately important to how the nose behaves when you're carrying real speed into a corner. Move to the side and the mid-engine layout finally makes visual sense of everything Chevrolet has been building toward since the C8 debuted. The cabin sits pushed dramatically forward over the front axle, while the rear haunches swell outward to make room for the induction system breathing behind the driver's shoulders. That flying buttress you see running from the roofline down into the rear fender isn't a styling flourish. It's functional bodywork, channeling air toward the engine bay and rear-mounted radiators that keep a twin-turbocharged, flat plane crank V8 from cooking itself on a hot track day. The side intake ahead of the rear wheel is deep and aggressive, more scoop than vent, because this generation of ZR1 needs to move enormous volumes of air to keep boost pressure and coolant temperatures under control. The stance is wide and low, sitting on staggered wheels wrapped in ultra-high performance rubber, with the rear tires noticeably broader than the fronts to put all that torque down without drama. Carbon ceramic brake rotors peek through the wheel spokes, gripped by multi-piston calipers finished in a shade that signals track intent rather than showroom flash. Ride height is aggressive, almost confrontational, the kind of stance that tells you this car was tuned by people who care more about a stopwatch than a parking lot. Walk around to the rear, and the ZR1 stops being subtle entirely. A towering fixed wing dominates the deck, mounted high on swan neck supports, so the underside of the wing stays clean and undisturbed by turbulent air. A detail borrowed directly from endurance racing, where every extra percent of downforce efficiency matters. The taillights are slim, angular, arrow-shaped units that echo the sharpness of the headlights up front, deliberately avoiding the full-width light bar so many modern performance cars default to. Underneath, the rear diffuser is enormous, a deep, multi-element carbon structure designed to accelerate air beneath the floor and generate downforce without adding drag the way a wing alone would. And then there's the exhaust, 4 round outlets centrally stacked, finished in a heat-tinted metal that hints at exactly how hard this powertrain works before that gas ever exits the car. This isn't a rear end designed to look fast sitting still. It's a rear end designed by people solving a cooling and downforce problem who happen to make it beautiful in the process. Open the door and drop into the cabin, and the ZR1 immediately signals that this is a car built around the driver, rather than around comfort for its own sake. The seats hold you with real bolstering, finished in a mix of leather and Alcantara-style material, chosen specifically because it stays grippy when your body is being loaded sideways at over a full lateral G. Contrast stitching runs through the door panels and dash in a shade that matches the exterior, tying the cabin's identity back to the car wrapped around it. The steering wheel is trimmed in exposed carbon fiber with a hand-stitched flat bottom, paddle shifters mounted directly behind it, sized and weighted for quick, decisive inputs rather than lazy cruising. The dashboard architecture wraps around the driver in a way that deliberately isolates them from the passenger side. A tall, squared-off ridge running down the center console physically separates driver controls from passenger space. An unapologetic cockpit philosophy this platform has carried since its debut. The digital instrument cluster reconfigures, depending on drive mode, shrinking the tachometer into a simple bar in track settings, so your eyes never have to leave the road to know when to shift. A curved infotainment display angles toward the driver, running the vehicle's drive mode selector, climate functions, and performance telemetry, while physical toggle switches beneath it handle the functions you need to access without taking your eyes off the apex ahead. Ambient lighting traces the edges of the dash and doors in a low, focused glow rather than a party trick light show, because this is a cabin meant to disappear into concentration once you're actually driving. Practicality was never going to be the ZR1's calling card, and Chevrolet doesn't pretend otherwise. There's no rear seat to speak of. This is strictly a 2-occupant environment. Storage lives in a modest rear trunk behind the engine bay and a small front compartment ahead of the cabin. Enough for a weekend bag or a helmet, not much more. Cup holders and cubbies are present but clearly secondary considerations in a cabin engineered first around visibility, ergonomics, and driver focus. If you need to carry passengers or cargo regularly, this was never going to be that car, and it never claims to be. Now we get to the reason this generation of ZR1 matters more than any before it. Beneath that vented hood sits a twin-turbocharged, flat-plane crank V8, a direct descendant of the naturally aspirated race engine that has powered Corvette's Le Mans program, now boosted for the road for the first time. Displacement lands in the mid-5-liter range, but the number that matters is the red line. This engine spins to a range normally reserved for exotic Italian machinery, not American muscle, because a flat-plane crankshaft allows for lighter reciprocating mass and dramatically quicker revving than the cross-plane V8S Corvette has used for generations. Output is expected to land north of 1,000 horsepower, with torque figures still officially unconfirmed at the time of this review, though industry estimates place the total comfortably above 800 pound-feet, delivered through an 8-speed, dual-clutch transmission sending power to the rear wheels. Chevrolet has not yet finalized every specification for the 2027 model year, so treat any number without an asterisk here as an informed projection, rather than a confirmed figure. The engineering story that defines this car isn't just the horsepower number. It's the decision to abandon supercharging entirely after 2 generations of blown ZR1S. A supercharger delivers power instantly but taxes the engine constantly, spinning parasitically even when you don't need the boost. Twin turbochargers, paired with that high-revving flat-plane architecture, let engineers chase both outright peak output and genuine top-end breathing in a way a supercharged engine physically can't match. The trade-off is turbo lag, and Chevrolet's engineers have spent enormous effort minimizing it with smaller, quicker spooling turbines and an anti-lag strategy borrowed from motorsport. But a small window of hesitation off idle before boost fully builds remains an honest characteristic of this kind of engine, not a flaw unique to this specific car. Start it up, and there's a mechanical bark before the idle settles into something busier and more metallic than the deep burble Corvette owners are used to. A direct consequence of that flat plane crank, which fires in a pattern closer to a Ferrari V8 than a traditional American small block. Roll into the throttle gently, and you can feel the engine building boost progressively. A faint whistle of induction rising underneath the exhaust note. Bury the pedal and the turbos spool hard, the exhaust note sharpening into a hard-edged wail as the tachometer sweeps toward that unusually high red line. Gear changes snapping through, with almost no interruption in thrust. Lift off hard, and there's a controlled hiss of wastegate chatter. A mechanical character that feels genuinely new for this nameplate. Less muscle car, more precision instrument. Behind the wheel, the ZR1 reveals a chassis that feels like it was tuned to exploit every ounce of that new powertrain, rather than merely contain it. Steering is quick, weighted heavily enough to feel connected at speed without becoming tiring around town. And turn-in happens with an immediacy that mid-engine layouts consistently deliver. You point, and the nose simply goes, unburdened by the mass of an engine sitting over the front axle. The adaptive suspension transforms dramatically between drive modes. In its calmer setting, it absorbs broken pavement with a composure that would surprise anyone expecting a stripped-out track weapon. While the sharpest track-focused mode firms everything up until the car feels almost bolted to the road, body roll all but eliminated through fast direction changes. Braking performance from the carbon ceramic setup is enormous, with a firm, high, confidence-inspiring pedal that resists fade lap after lap. The rear differential manages power delivery out of corners intelligently, allowing you to get back on the throttle earlier than the raw horsepower figure would suggest is wise. They'll push hard enough on a cold tire, and the rear will still let you know who's actually in charge. None of this comes without real compromise. That firm, track-tuned suspension setting turns punishing over broken city pavement, and low-speed maneuverability suffers from limited rear visibility over that towering engine cover and fixed wing. Cabin noise at highway speed is considerable. This is not a car built to whisper on a long commute. Turbo lag, however well managed, remains a genuine characteristic rather than a myth engineers have fully erased. And with performance options and carbon ceramic brakes checked, pricing climbs into territory that puts real pressure on the value proposition this nameplate has always leaned on. This car finds its purpose on wide, flowing mountain roads where second and third gear can be held for miles, and on a proper circuit where that flat plane engine finally gets to explore the top third of its rev range without interruption. It's less at home crawling through downtown traffic, and it knows it. Everything about the driving position, the visibility, and the suspension tuning points toward open pavement and a clear horizon, positioned against the market, the ZR1 finds itself in genuinely intimidating company. The Porsche 911 Turbo S, the McLaren Artura, and Ferrari's turbocharged V8 lineup all occupy similar performance territory, each with decades of exotic brand pedigree behind them. What the ZR1 offers that none of them can match is the sheer specific output achievement of a flat plane. Twin-turbo American V8 delivered at a price that, even loaded with options, is expected to undercut every one of those rivals by a significant margin. It won't carry the badge cachet of a prancing horse or a raging bull on the hood, but dynamically and numerically, it now has a legitimate case to be cross-shopped against cars that cost dramatically more. Official 2027 pricing hasn't been confirmed by Chevrolet at the time of this review, but based on outgoing ZR1 positioning and expected content increases, expect a starting figure in the low $200,000 range before options, climbing meaningfully higher once you start checking boxes for carbon ceramic brakes, the most aggressive aerodynamic package, and lightweight carbon body panels. So who actually buys this car? Not the buyer chasing the loudest badge on the valet stand. This is for the driver who already understands what a flat plane crank does to an engine's character, who cross-shops this against six-figure European machinery and wants to win the argument on merit rather than emotion, and who genuinely intends to use every one of those turbocharged horsepower on a track day, rather than let them sit unused in a garage. It's a car for someone secure enough in their own taste to choose substance over the assumptions other people make about a bow tie on the nose. The 2027 Corvette ZR1 represents the moment Chevrolet stopped treating the supercharger as this nameplate's signature and started chasing something more technically ambitious. A high-revving, turbocharged, race-derived engine wrapped in a chassis finally capable of using every bit of what it produces. It's the culmination of decades spent proving that American engineering doesn't need borrowed European DNA to compete at the top of the performance world. It just needed the right architecture to finally get out of its own way. Here's the question worth arguing about in the comments. Does moving away from the supercharger make this the most complete ZR1 ever built? Or does something get lost the moment this badge stops sounding like a Corvette and starts sounding like everything it used to hunt down? If you want more reviews that go beyond the spec sheet and actually explain why a car drives the way it does, this is exactly the kind of channel worth sticking around for. Subscribe to Premium Automotive Reviews and join us for the next one. Some cars chase a lap time. The ZR1 chases the idea that America was never actually behind. It just hadn't finished building the engine that would prove it.